we have a special person, special to Hawk Mountain, that's going to be introducing our speakers today. And Ruth Tingay from Scotland is here. She was a trainee intern in sometime sometime in the past, and she was also a leadership, I believe, trainee as well, coming back in the 2000s, and came back a few times. I was working on a book, co-authored a book on eagles. So we're very glad that she took the big journey across the ocean to join us today, and she'll be introducing our speakers today. So Ruth, big round of applause.
Hi, great to be back. Somebody asked me a couple of days ago what I think has changed at Hawk Mountain since I was here in 1996. So some things have changed. The biggest change, I think, is what happens to the interns here. When, you know, if you're in the visitor center and you go downstairs into the gallery, do you know where I am? Yeah. If you turn back and as if you're facing the counter, there's a little door in the corner. Have you ever been through that door? That was the basement. That's where the interns had their offices. So there's no light in there at all. It's this tiny little cubby hole, and they put us in there to keep us out of the way, out of trouble. So when you compare that with what's going on now down at the Acopian Center, you guys have got it good. Okay, so it's my great pleasure to host this afternoon. Thank you, Laurie, for inviting me. I'm just going to crack on and get on. We've got some brilliant speakers. The first one, so I should just say, with these speakers, I've had to write phonetics on here so that I pronounce their name properly, because I have real trouble with some of these names. So the first one, I've written Wouter. Is that right? Wouter Vansteelant. Okay, I call him Walter. He responds to that. So let me see what's written here. We've got Dr. Wouter Vansteelant is a movement ecologist and senior researcher at the Bird Eye Center for Global Ecological Change at the University of Groningen. So I said that right? In the Netherlands. Wouter completed his PhD at the University of Amsterdam. He's the co-founder of Batumi Raptor Count, which is what he's going to be talking about today, in the Republic of Georgia. Again, that's the country, not the state. And he was a leadership trainee here in 2011. So, Wouter, over to you.
Thanks, Ruth, for the introduction. I think I have to put this a bit higher for me. There we go. So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for being here. It really is a tremendous pleasure to have the opportunity to talk in this magnificent amphitheater at this fantastic institution called Hawk Mountain about a project that's very dear to me because it's where essentially everything started for me. Like Ruth summed up a little bit of the stuff that I did. And it really all started in the Republic of Georgia, founding the Batumi Raptor Count project back in 2008, some 15 years and 15 kilograms ago. And it was the start of an unexpected journey for me. And I want to acknowledge that the two guys, Brecht Verhelst and Johannes Janssen, they were actually out there in 2007, just casually traveling through the Caucasus when they stumbled on Batumi in the middle of the autumn migration season, and they saw fantastic numbers of birds passing through, and they figured like, hey, we should really do something here and get some people together and start a migration count. So I joined up with them in 2008. We were all, I think all three of us were bachelor students at the time at the University of Ghent in Belgium. And then from there, from that project is actually where I ended up in Hawk Mountain. And I could probably fill the whole half hour telling you just about these two things on how that happened. It involved a midnight train, not to Georgia, but from Georgia to Armenia, to go and see Keith Bilstein. Keith, we had written this fantastic book on migrating raptors of the world, which was on our night closet like a Bible. And suddenly we got a call from Armenia, from Karen Agbabian, which I think was also a former intern at Hawk Mountain. And Keith happened to be visiting Karen in Armenia, and he knew about our project, told Keith about it. And we got a call saying like, hey, Keith would really like to talk to you guys, but no time to come to Georgia. Can one of you come over to Armenia? So I jumped on the train, had a little run-in with the Armenian border guards because I didn't get my visa. Put out of the country again, wild taxi ride to Yerevan, but I managed to get there on time to see Keith. And that was just a fantastic opportunity. And I think one of the first times in my life that I really felt heard by someone, that he basically said, tell me about your project. I started talking for about an hour and a half. Keith didn't say a word. He just listened to what I had to say. And at the end of it all, he said, you guys are doing everything absolutely right. Come over to Hawk Mountain. We'll get you into the leadership internship program. And yeah, well, you get 3 months of time to just think and develop ideas, which is just a unique opportunity. Keith was also the one who invited us over to a conference in Spain, which is where I ended up meeting Judy Chamoun, that would become my PhD supervisor at the University of Amsterdam. And from there on, I went on to do some freelancing stuff, found a postdoc in Spain for 3 years, and then finally ended up in the Netherlands again, where I am based now. And if I have time, I'll say a few words about that at the very end. But so that's enough about me individually, because I really have to talk about this project, the Batumi Raptor Count, which is the fruit of the labor of a great many people who have invested a lot of time and love and energy in making this all happen. And so the presentation today, I'll go a little bit over the Batumi story. There's no way I could tell it to you in full in half an hour. But I'll also then try to look ahead a little bit, like what challenges do we face for continuing this raptor count in Georgia long term. We've been going for 15 years. We want to go for, well, 90 would be good, but let's say 150 is the ambition. And then at the very end, I want to make it a little bit abstract, and because we talk a lot about saving raptors and conserving raptors and managing raptors, but really at the end of the day, I really think it comes down to, if not saving the world, saving ourselves, because at the moment times are complicated. Let's put it that way. So yeah, just as an introduction to it, I just really want to give you an impression of what we encountered when we came to Georgia for the first time. And for that, I'm just going to show the first minute and a half or so of this short documentary by Nicholas Rod, who's a British filmmaker who came to make a movie about the project. And then we'll take it from there. So that's what it is. It's a fantastic place with fantastic migration and fantastic people and some serious problems. An emotional roller coaster. It was like that for us when we came there for the very beginning. I get goosebumps when I see the shots every time. And this is where we are. We're at the coast of the Eastern Black Sea on this massive flyway where birds from all over Russia, Eurasia converge on their way to Africa. And so when we set out there to count the birds for the first time, we were expecting to see proper numbers of birds, but it ended up being 1 million+ raptor migration sites, which For the people in Central America, they're like, ha, million. But for yeah, for European standards, that's a hell of a lot of birds. And yeah, so that just blew our minds, and the response from the international bird watching community was tremendous, and that really set us on our way with this project. So we did the first pilot counts in 2008, 2009, really just small scale, figuring out how to even count the birds, and ended up writing a first publication about that, which was published in 2011 when I was interning here for the first time. I remember sitting in the Acopian Center processing the comments of the reviewer and a bit of a nasty editor that was a bit picky about statistics and whatnot. But yeah, that was where it began. And we ended up finding like some really impressive numbers. So like honey buzzards, we were on average those 2 years, we counted about 450,000 of them, which if you compared it to the world population estimates at that time, could have been anywhere between 45 or 130% of the world population. So that already gives you an indication that these lower estimates were just far too low. And of course, in Georgia, in Russia, these vast forests that they have there, there's just no way to monitor breeding populations or estimate breeding populations really accurately there. So it was not surprising that we were running into these kind of findings. And overall, there were about 10 species for which we were counting at least 1% of the world population, if not more. So it was clear that we wanted to really do an effort and do on long-term monitoring there. And just to give you an idea of what that kind of intense migration looks like, this is it. This is a peak day of honey buzzards. The year was up there on the beginning. I don't remember exactly when it was now. But yeah, just massive streams of birds continuously coming through. I don't know, you can maybe hear the sound of the clickers on the background. This is a bit of a horror stream because it's all spread out. That's not really nicely structured. So this is really just the job of one or two people figuring out like, okay, you get those ones, I get those ones. But at the end of the day, we managed to get a pretty accurate count. And yeah, well, that's what it looks like on the station there. So yeah, where we are, that's in the Republic of Georgia on the eastern Black Sea coast. And the reason that we get so many raptors there, as all these birds make their way across the greater Caucasus, down through Turkey and the Middle East into East Africa, is topography for a big part. So there's a few known flight paths for these birds from eastern Georgia, central Georgia, but predominantly the Western Flyway is the most important one. And that has to do with the Lesser Caucasus Mountains here and the Black Sea coast there, which together create a bottleneck. Well, I mean, you can see the bottleneck. And pushes all these birds through that area. A bit more about the Republic of Georgia. It's a small country, about population about 3.7 million people. The main language is Kartuli, Georgian. The older generation all speak Russian. Younger generation are switching increasingly to English. Former Soviet country, of course. And in the very first year that we started there was also when the Russian-Georgian war was going on. We also lost our funding for that reason, but we were mad enough to go there anyway. And most of the fights, they took place in the north, so we were not really affected in the south. But still, it was a bit tense, and my parents were freaking out that I was going there, of course. But, you know, you're young and naive, and you want crazy shit. Nowadays, it's an EU candidate country, but yeah, there's strong generational divides in the country. I'll get back to that a bit more at the end. Batumi, where we are, is specifically located in the Autonomous Republic of Ajaria, which is about 350K people, most of them living in Batumi. It's about 40% Muslim, 55% Orthodox, and it's developing incredibly fast. I mean, the way that we have seen this place change since we first started there has really blown our minds. But they're also repeating mistakes, right? So it's like sprawling tourism, building big casinos and attracting the wrong audience in many ways, and just trying to earn big bucks really quickly. And then a project like ours is, of course, stands far away from that. But over the years, we've become better and better at integrating our work in also what the government really wants. The Batumi bottleneck specifically, there had been some partial counts done in the 70s and the 90s, and in 2000 there was an important paper published in Bird Conservation International, which sort of described the migration and the hunting issues there for the first time. But then our pilot counts in 2008, 9, 10, those were really the first full season counts that really showed the true scale of the migration there. And since 2011, we have a fully standardized monitoring operational. So yeah. And apart from the geography, it's also meteorology that plays a role in pushing these birds there, because the Lesser Caucasus Mountains by themselves, well, lesser, they're not the biggest mountains, but what very often happens there, especially in late summer, early autumn, is that you get this hot seawater, a lot of evaporation, and then that moist air comes inland, gets pushed against the mountains, and it develops this really thick cloud cover, which makes it very difficult for birds to soar, and makes this bottleneck effect of the mountains even stronger. And that's actually describing that became the first chapter of my PhD, which I started here at Hawk Mountain during my leadership internship with Keith, among others, as a co-author. Took until 2014 for it to get published because, yeah, well, you heard Diego talk about publications and journals and whatnot. It's a difficult thing to do, but yeah, finally we got there. And I try to avoid the word discovering these kinds of things because, of course, these processes and this magnitude of this migration were known to the local population for ages already, and especially to these guys, the hunters, which when they see those clouds developing over those mountains, they know what is going to happen. And they rush up the hills, awaiting the raptors, hoping to get a honey buzzard or two to shoot down. We also put quite a lot of effort in studying that, like where do they shoot, how much do they shoot, how much of an impact does it have. Johannes Janssen, one of the main founders of the project, he did this for his master thesis and basically was able to build a predictive model of where most of the hunting intensity would take place. And it's like northward facing slopes between these lower lying areas at the coast and then the beginning of the Lesser Caucasus, which are really the prime hunting sites. And well, if you talk about education and whatnot, it's not surprising that that a lot of guys over there, of course, it's all men that are into this issue because, yeah, that's what they learn from a very young age. And the stream of raptors seems endless, so it seems harmless to them what they are doing. But yeah, that gives you a little bit of an idea of the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. We're dealing with cultural change that we want to achieve. And so we very quickly settled on the idea that this would be a process that would take decades to really change, unless you want to go out and play warfare with the hunters, which we didn't want to do. We wanted to take a constructive approach together with the local community in trying to address this problem. In the beginning, we very much had the impression that a lot of it was about food because raptors do get eaten there. But later on, we found out that actually, thanks to the work of Anna Sandor, who had also been an intern at Hawk Mountain after this, she went out, did many interviews with hunters. And when you just don't give them a questionnaire where the first question is, do you eat raptors? Which then leads you to the conclusion that they shoot raptors to eat. You just have open conversations with people. And then the first reason that almost all of them state for shooting the birds is really just like it's fun, it's a hobby. And for a lot of these guys that are unemployed and have nothing better to do. So there was a question this morning about economic development. I think in this kind of context, it's a clear example of how economic development can actually help raptors by getting these guys out doing something useful. And while they are out at work, the raptors pass safely and everybody's better off. So that's a little bit where we need to go. So that was the dark side of the bottleneck. There's also a grain zone with a very long falconry tradition. I'm not going to go into explaining it in detail because my time is going to run out before I know it, but essentially it's a seasonal thing where they catch Eurasian sparrowhawks, which traditionally were then used to go hunt for quail. And this was like making use of a seasonal mass, the seasonal passage of huge amounts of bird biomass, which was basically free food for people living in those regions for hundreds of years. Nowadays, it's done more for fun as well. But these trappers, they also have a lot of valuable knowledge, and we try to work with them in a constructive way. But unfortunately, I won't have time to go into that today. But so yeah, that's a little bit the setting that we work in. And the whole project that we do is completely volunteer based. So essentially we get about 50, 60 volunteers every year coming together in Georgia. I can see it on the screen there as well. But, oh, I skipped over that easily. So yeah, and we try to get at least 6 counters and 1 count coordinator per station. We work from 2 count stations. Since 2008, we've had over 400 people from 30 countries joining us from over 6 continents. We try to accept both experts and beginners because beginners have to begin somewhere, and many of these people end up being really repeat offenders and keep coming back to Georgia all the time. And if you run a volunteer-based project, it's of course super important to create an inclusive environment. In the beginning, in the first years, it was really just a bunch of young guys from Belgium and the Netherlands, and a few brave women like Zoe, who is here as well, that had the balls, let's say, to join us on that mountaintop. But over the years, it's really become a lot more diverse in terms of age, gender. I think next year we can expect to have a fully female-led count with just female coordinators. So I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, we try to maximize the accessibility of the project, especially for Georgians, by basically making it free for them. The count is run from these 2 count stations, varying distances from the coast. And essentially, we count all the raptors that pass this line between these 2 stations and then cover a corridor of about 12 kilometers wide, which is where the vast majority of the raptors pass through. One of the great prides, I think, of the project is that we were very, being kind of young and into tech as well, forward thinking in like the technology that we wanted to use. Like the first years, we were still writing down everything on paper, and I would travel back in with a stack of papers like that in my backpack, then spend months in Belgium putting it all in Excel, which is a very error-prone process. So you really don't want that. And then together with tracktalent.nl, which is a Dutch website for migration counters, the guy came over to Georgia to really understand what do we need in the field to record the data that we need in an efficient way, and develop this fantastic app, which is now also being used in Cape May, for example. I think Hawkridge recently started using it as well. And this allows us, it gives a lot of advantages, like, for example, weird combinations of information that don't really make sense. You get an alert immediately, like, hey, you're entering something wrong here. So that helps a lot with the error control. The data gets streamed right into a database, and every day is uploaded on the website. So every day you can see our seasonal total mounting up. I mean, we have the data to the minute detail when every bird passes, really. And at the end of the season, the clean data is then uploaded to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So all our data is open access for everyone, which at the beginning was a bit scary because your data is gold, right? So for you as a project, it might not be the best, but we always figured that it's in the interest of the birds for these data to be open. So that's why we decided on this approach. So yeah, I think it's no exaggeration to say that our standards in open data and reproducible science are really just world class. And we've established a unique monitoring in the Eastern Flyway, which for many years just didn't exist, and have been able to already detect significant changes in the populations of some of these raptors. And so also in a BirdLife led review a couple of years ago, our project was identified as the model project for that flyway, let's say, on how you could expand this into a more flyway scale endeavor, not just in Batumi, but also in Lebanon, in Iran, in Turkey. So many important places that haven't been systematically counted for very long, but where we now see more and more of these grassroots projects taking root, and that we've also been able to support. And so I think that's not a bad result for a volunteer-run project that runs on a budget of 25,000 euros per year. It'll get a little bit more expensive to run the count in the future, and I would like to be able to reward better the coordinators and such. So in the end, at the end of the day, I would like to go a bit more ambitious with this. But yeah, say what you want, but this is a ridiculous return on investment, and I'm just extremely proud of that. What have we learned from all this effort? Well, I won't take you through all the species, but one of the things that we do is we record age information. And so we were able to show that, for example, with these honey buzzards, just looking at the adults that come through and comparing that to world population estimates, we count 120 to 180% of the world population. So yeah, those world population estimates are bollocks. Really need to be revised, and that was also recognized in some recent papers. Another thing that age-specific trend analysis allow you to do is to detect trends that might be obscured if you just look at the species level. So Montagu's harriers, for example, they appear to be stable, but if you look specifically at the juveniles, we see massive declines in that, which probably signals that something is going wrong with the reproduction of the species in Russia. Might have something to do with agricultural changes. But by far the biggest change that we've seen is the black kite. We heard a crazy percentage of increases from Mississippi kites this morning from Ernesto. With us, the black kites, it's an increase of 10% per year. And so where we used to count less than 100,000 back in 2011, we now count in excess of 300,000 of these birds. So we're really seeing massive changes, even over a relatively short time scale, right? Like 10, 15 years. And in the case of the black kites, we think this is related to the birds changing their migration behavior. So they used to fly all the way across the Sahara to go and winter in sub-Saharan Africa. But what we've seen since the 2000s, or what we know from fragmentary information, is that the wintering population of black kites in the Middle East has really exploded. And for example, there was a new landfill created in the Negev desert in Israel, which was quickly colonized by red kites, and the numbers there have really skyrocketed. And similar situations are occurring in Southeast Europe and Turkey, where more and more black kites are spending the winter. And so you can imagine if these birds don't have to cross the Sahara anymore, and that they can just spend the whole winter eating junk food and getting fat and juicy. It's an easy life, right? And yeah, so this is a species that is doing well because it knows how to capitalize on a growing human population, a growing amount of garbage in that part of the world. So yeah, but oh yeah, and just to say that we also know that there is actually a connection between the birds that we count in Georgia and those garbage dumps from, in this case, tracking data from Israel, where we see the individuals that were tagged on those garbage dumps. They just passed through Batumi. And now and again, we also see some of these wing-tagged birds passing by. So that also actually proves the connection. I am going to go over my time if I see David waving 5 minutes at me already. But that's okay. We can chat later. If you want to read the whole story on, I would recommend you to look at this article we published in British Birds. It's openly available on our website as well. So that really recounts the whole story that I just told you in a bit more detail. But the broader context of the counts, of course, is that we also want to leverage them to benefit the birds for conservation purposes. And I think one of the main things we've been able to do is to put Batumi on the map as an ecotourism destination, which really got the attention from the local government and caused them to invest in this kind of bird watching infrastructure, for example, which is a far cry from what it used to look like when we started counting there a couple of years ago. So yeah, not bad for us either, I would say. They're also organizing a bird festival now, in principle, every year. It's going to happen again this year. So we're really excited about that, and it really helps to also invite local policymakers and such to just to know what's going on, because even like the government, they just don't even know what's happening in their own country when it comes to these migrating birds, and to also show the economic value of these raptors. And how the hunting, for example, is a threat for the revenue that the country could get from this ecotourism, because many people simply don't want to come to Georgia because they don't want to be confronted with the sight of a raptor being shot out of the air. It also works at a more local level because the ecotourism model that we developed with the local community is one of guest houses. So most of the people that come over, they don't stay in a big hotel in the city there in the background, but they stay with local families in these kinds of houses around the count station. So the local community benefits directly from what we are doing. And we also see that that created a conversation within the community about the impact of the hunting and and basically saw a strong reduction in the hunting pressure in the villages where we count. There's a lot of need to scale this impact up to other places because I mean, our counts only cover a fraction of the area, the map that I showed you before of the potential hunting area. But yeah, that's the way that we try to have a constructive impact. And of course, focusing on the next generation, right? So taking the kids onto the count stations, going into the schools, which we've done for many years. But more recently, we also created a training program for the local teachers themselves. And this was the work from Rafa Benefumea, who's a really talented educator from Spain, had a lot of experience already in Tarifa and has been with us for many years. And so this is what Georgian looks like, by the way. So he developed this wonderful book, which really gives teachers the tools that they need to be able to teach about nature, about birds, about migration, about conservation. And the teachers have been, well, they're crazy about him, but they're also crazy about the project in general, because as teachers, they didn't really have access to this kind of training opportunities for a long time. And well, I think another thing that we can be really proud of at BRC is that more and more our reach is not just in Georgia, but also more global. We had people like Paulina from Mexico, Pamela from Kekoldi, Marta, who's going to talk after this, from Kenya, who've all visited us in Georgia, thanks to the support of Hawk Mountain, who enabled them to travel to our project. And that has been such a fantastic feeling, you know, to be able to work with Hawk Mountain in that way and sort of be a mini Hawk Mountain in Georgia, giving training opportunities to people. More recently, we had Eksan Talebi from Iran, who was with us a while ago. This year, he's going to coordinate with us. Wouter from the new migration count in Egypt was with us last autumn to see how we do things. And we got a group of 3 Turkish people from Istanbul with a delegation of the Istanbul municipality to see how we do things in Georgia. And that really got them enthusiastic about reviving the counts in Istanbul, which haven't been properly counted for very long. Also from Thailand and Xuxi from China got a lot of experience by working with us. And I mean, it fills us with pride that we're able to share our experience with these people and that they can take that back their own count sites and yeah, keep the things going. I already told you, Barbara. Anyway, not too bad actually. I'm getting to the end, so just reflecting a little bit on like, okay, so I'm giving a bit of a good news show, right? Like of all the good things that we've done, and it's also wonderful. But there's also real barriers and weaknesses to the model that we have. So volunteering is fantastic because we can do things on a budget of 25K. Of course, if you would count all the travel expenses and the contributions paid by volunteers, you would get to a much bigger amount. So the total input, let's say, is bigger than that. But a bigger weakness of volunteers, I think, is that volunteering for people who live in Georgia or Caucasus countries is a luxury that they cannot afford. And since we are not really able to pay salaries and such, we find that really we're just ecotourism outcompetes us, and many of the good people end up working as tour guides and such, which in itself is also important. But it's really difficult to break through this, and that's, I think, a big challenge for the future. And the volunteering also makes the project sensitive to disruptions, and this could be conflict, but it can also be pandemic, for example, because in the COVID times, there was 1 year that we were not able to do the count. The language barrier used to be a massive barrier, but the young generation in Georgia is really much more Western oriented. I mean, since the war in 2008, they were like, okay, fuck this shit, and our future is elsewhere. So they have really been learning English, and that made it a lot easier. Lack of training opportunities, well, we try to fill that gap, and with the help of Hawk Mountain, that really puts it on another level. And we see Georgian organizations growing stronger every year. And again, Hawk Mountain, Natia Javakishvili from Sabuko, Gizos Escuria from FFI Georgia, Aslan Bolkvadze, who's currently working with the tourism department that organizes the Bird Festival. These 3 people have all come through Hawk Mountain and benefited greatly from the program. So it's been really great to see that growing, and it doesn't go as fast as you would like sometimes, but step by step, we're going in the right direction, right? Other challenges for the future, well, I mean, we could talk about renewables and poisoning and shooting, but I think that those are quite well-known threats. I wanted to reflect a little bit more about other things. So for example, technology. I expect that within the next 10, 20 years, AI, camera networks with AI species recognition algorithms will be able to do migration counts, possibly even better than people can. It might sound unrealistic, but I think from what I've seen from the field of research, I think this is a realistic expectation. And also there's this perverse thing of like technology, every new technology becomes like the new hot thing that is then privileged by big journals and whatever. But we should remember that technology is a tool. It's never a goal in itself, right? And at the same time, also emphasize the human factor of these migration counts as places where people come together and where you build networks, and which I think sometimes we don't do enough. Like we try to sell the migration counts from a scientific perspective, but really they play an important function in building human capacity for conservation. Another big challenge for small local NGOs like ours is, well, rising inflation, increasing cost of living, increasing travel costs, which makes volunteering more difficult, which makes it more difficult for us to get our annual budget together, but also growing bureaucratic load. So like banks getting completely paranoid about you getting a payment of €1,000 from an unusual place, and then they harass you and they threaten to close your bank account if you don't declare within so much time what's going on. And of course, these people have no clue about the kind of work that we're doing, right? All their fraud systems are directed on typical companies, but business models that we don't fit in at all. So this makes it really difficult to operate and increasingly difficult to operate. And in a really broad context, I would say that, this rise of post-truth politics and the rising geopolitical tensions that we see today are arguably the biggest threat of all when it comes to conserving migratory raptors, especially in the part of the world where we're at. This is a map showing countries that had armed conflicts in 2023. Regardless of what you think of any of these conflicts, whether it be Ukraine, Russia, where massive swaths of forest are being bombed, that are being destroyed by bombing, essentially. People in refugee camps in the Middle East that resort to trapping migratory falcons to sell to rich falconers in Saudi Arabia. You name it, a lot of it is driven by conflict and whatnot. And while that can feel a little bit overwhelming and such, I think this only really shows that it's more important than ever to have projects like ours, well, where people from different cultures, nations, religions can actually come together, unite around the shared goal, and build the kind of networks across borders that we need if we want to have a better world, right? And at the end of the day. So yeah, that's maybe a little bit hippie of me, but well, I'm not going to apologize for that. So there you are. So yeah, raptors as doves as peace, as far as I'm concerned. That's also how we behaved when the conflict in Ukraine broke out. And even though that conflict broke out, we still published a Russian translation of that British Birds article in the Russian Raptors Conservation Journal, because at the end of the day, those Russian researchers, many of them have been displaced out of the country just because of not wanting to be conscripted as soldiers. So a lot of the raptor research in Russia has just fallen flat because of this. And I refuse to be pressured by international politics into abandoning these people or not communicating with these people. On the contrary, Raptor Researchers United will never be divided. That's that sort of idea. So yeah, looking ahead, we're just going to maintain our monitoring, keep training young people, raise Georgia's profile as an ecotourism destination, and use that to the benefit of the birds. And hopefully we'll get better at getting some more structural funding, because that has been a huge challenge for us. And if Rosalie Edge once said the time to protect the species is when it's still common, I would say the time for building peace is when you still have it. So let's keep doing these kind of projects, roll them out across the flyway against all odds. And at the end of the day, the goodness and humanity will prevail. And that's where we are. So thank you very much. Thank you.
I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. So
All
who
right.
wants to go?
Sorry about that, but when I get going, I just can't stop.
So, I've wondered, is the population of black kite and red kite also going up because of the death of so many vultures and their secondary scavengers?
Huh. But it's an interesting idea in itself. But I think as far as the European populations of vultures go, I wouldn't think that because they're doing relatively well. And in Africa, it's a really bad situation. Uh, it's an interesting idea, hard to prove. Uh, yeah, good question.
I have a question over here.
Mhm.
Kind of a similar vein. I was curious if anybody's working on looking at the kites that are kind of changing their behavior to take advantage of these huge garbage dumps.
Hmm.
Is there any risk that that could become a huge ecological trap for some of these birds? I don't know what the kind of
Yes.
potential toxicity of some of these dumps are in
Yeah.
different areas, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah. Yes, but perhaps in another way. So what we've seen already happening in Western Europe, in Spain, for example, is a massive increase in wintering populations of white storks. Similar story going to the garbage dumps, and it seems to have only well, it benefited. The population seemed to have only grown because of this. But what will probably happen in the future, what is happening now in Spain, is that these garbage dumps become closed off because you don't want to have open garbage dumps, as countries develop. So then it's an ecological trap in the sense that you attract a lot of birds to winter in that place, but now we're looking at a scenario where suddenly that resource is going to disappear. And then it's a huge question of how the species are actually going to respond to that. So short term, the kites might be happy, but long term, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Yeah.
All right, nice. Any other questions? Catch up with Wouter at the reception.
Cool.